The first week at Jefferson High had been anything but kind to Amina Walker. It had been 5 days of carefully calculated silence, punctuated by subtle side-eyes, half-whispered mockeries, and the kind of exclusion that didn't require words. She'd expected the transition to be challenging. Moving to a new town always was, but what she hadn't anticipated was how lonely a crowded hallway could feel. Amina was 16 with a quiet grace that didn't scream for attention. Her skin was the color of polished mahogany, smooth and deep, and her tightly coiled natural hair framed her face like a halo. In her old school in Atlanta, she had been part of the poetry club, known for her sharp metaphors and soft delivery. Here in suburban Massachusetts, she felt more like a foreign artifact than a new student. Her teachers were polite, though not warm, and her classmates rarely looked her in the eye. On Monday, 2 girls giggled after mimicking her accent in the locker room. Tuesday, someone left a comment on her desk. "Is that even your real hair?" By Wednesday, she'd stopped trying to eat lunch in the cafeteria and instead took refuge in the library pretending to read while fighting the weight in her chest. Friday was the worst. She had just exited her last class, American History, where the teacher had passed over her raised hand for the 3rd time that week. As the crowd funneled into the hallway, Amina kept her head low, clutching her notebook like a shield. She overheard snippets of conversation, football games, weekend plans, the usual echoes of teenage freedom. But none of them were for her. As she made her way to her locker, a group of students passed her by. One boy, not loud, just careless, murmured something under his breath. Amina didn't catch all of it, but she heard enough. "Why's she always look like she's about to cry?" She pivoted without thinking, rushing past the double doors at the end of the hall and into the nearest girl's bathroom. It was empty, cold, and quiet, the kind of place that held echoes like secrets. Amina slid into the last stall, locked the door, and dropped her bag to the tiled floor with a thud. She didn't cry at first. She just sat there breathing shallowly, listening to the buzz of the overhead lights. The walls around her felt like armor, the graffitied stall door, a final barrier between her and the world outside. But slowly, inevitably, the tears came. She cried silently, head against her knees, biting down the sobs so no one passing might hear. She hated this feeling. This overwhelmingly consuming shame mixed with sadness, as if simply existing in her own skin was a provocation. The sting wasn't just in what they said, but in how easily they ignored her. 10 minutes passed, maybe 20. Time felt diluted. Her breathing slowed, though her eyes were still swollen. She wiped her face with the sleeve of her hoodie and reached for her bag, ready to collect herself before the janitor came through for cleaning. That's when she saw it. A piece of folded notebook paper slid slowly under the stall door. Amina froze. Her breath caught in her throat. The paper didn't come with footsteps or laughter, just silence. Someone had been out there close enough to notice her and chose not to speak. With trembling fingers, she picked it up and unfolded it. The handwriting was neat, small, and unfamiliar. "You matter more than you know. Don't let them dim your light. M." It was such a simple note. No names, no context. Just a line of empathy like a candle lit in the dark. For a long moment, Amina just stared at it. Then her eyes blurred again, but this time the tears were different, softer. There was no way to know who M was. It could be a girl, a teacher, maybe even someone she'd never properly spoken to. But it didn't matter. For the first time that week, Amina felt seen. She sat back down on the closed toilet seat, the note in her lap. She read it again, and again. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wouldn't change the entire school climate overnight, but it was enough. Enough to remind her that the world wasn't entirely made of cruelty and indifference. Enough to make her breathe a little deeper. That night, as she sat in her bedroom, she pinned the note inside her journal. The journal itself had gone untouched for the weeks. Her poems had dried up under the glare of unfamiliarity and isolation. But now her fingers hovered over the pages again. She wrote. Not much. Just a few lines. But in those lines, she poured out what it felt like to be invisible and what it meant to be seen. Her words weren't polished. They didn't rhyme, but they were honest. And honesty, Amina had learned, was a kind of bravery. As she closed the journal, her eyes settled on the note once more. She whispered the words like a prayer. Don't let them dim your light. It stayed with her through the weekend, through the next Monday morning when she stepped into the hallway again. She didn't walk taller, not yet, but her shoulders weren't hunched quite as much. And when the same hallway voices whispered again, she didn't shrink. She remembered the note. And she kept walking. Somewhere in the crowd, M might be watching. Or maybe not. But Amina had been reminded she wasn't entirely alone, and that was a beginning. On Monday morning, Amina woke up with the note still resting beneath her pillow. She had read it again before falling asleep the night before, clutching it like a talisman. It was amazing how 7 words could carry enough weight to keep her afloat. As she dressed, she found herself reaching for the yellow hoodie she usually reserved for the weekend, soft, oversized, and most importantly, comforting. It wasn't armor, but it was close enough. Her mother dropped her off in front of the school like every other morning, but this time Amina didn't linger in the car, stalling. She got out quickly, clutching her bag close to her chest and whispering a quiet goodbye. The chill in the early autumn air bit into her cheeks, but she welcomed it. It reminded her she was alive, present, real. Inside, the usual chaos greeted her students congregating in groups, backpacks slung carelessly on one shoulder, loud conversations filling the halls. No one noticed her. For once, that didn't sting quite as badly. She moved through the rouged crowd like a ghost, yes, but a ghost with a secret. By third period, Amina was seated in the back of her literature class, the only class where she felt a flicker of belonging. The teacher, Mr. Greaves, was an older man with salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He always seemed genuinely interested in what students had to say, even if most didn't bother to contribute. Today, he had brought in printed copies of Maya Angelou's poem, Still I Rise. When he read the first stanza aloud, Amina felt something shift inside her. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I'll rise. The words echoed within her. She had read this poem before back in Atlanta, but never had it hit this hard. Not until now. Her fingers tightened around the paper as if trying to hold on to something bigger than herself. Mr. Greaves paused after reading the stanza and looked around the room. What does it mean to rise? He asked. The class remained silent. Amina's heart thumped in her chest. She looked down at the note again folded neatly in her lap. Maybe today, she thought. Her hand rose trembling but steady. Mr. Greaves nodded toward her. Yes, Amina. She cleared her throat. It means, even when people try to push you down, you keep standing. You don't let their hate become your truth. For a moment, the class was quiet. Then Mr. Greaves smiled. Exactly. Well said. Amina felt her ears burned, but this time it wasn't shame. It was something else. Something warmer. Later that afternoon, as she made her way to her locker, she found another folded piece of paper tucked behind her books. Her heart quickened. She unfolded it with fingers that already knew the rhythm. Today you rose. I saw you. A wave of emotion crashed over her again, but she didn't cry. She smiled. It was small, almost imperceptible, but real. Somebody was watching, not in a creepy way, but in the way that meant someone actually cared. Someone saw her. She looked around, trying to guess who it could be. Was it someone in her lit class? Someone in the hallway? A teacher, a fellow ghost in the crowd. For the rest of the day, her eyes scanned faces differently, not out of fear or expectation, but out of a wonder. Who was M? That night, Amina added a new poem to her journal. It was untitled, still rough, but the words came easier now. She sat in silence, but her heart was loud, a whisper beneath the laughter of the crowd. One voice heard her in the quiet she wore, slipped a note of hope beneath the door. On Tuesday it happened again. This time the note was taped inside her locker. Your light is showing. Keep going. Angel. There was something addictive about the kindness in those messages. They didn't fix everything. People still stared. The whispers hadn't stopped. But they carved out a space of safety in her otherwise unpredictable days. By Wednesday, she looked forward to finding the notes. They became part of her ritual. Wake up, journal a little, go to school, and at some point in the day find another flicker of light folded in paper. By Thursday, her mother noticed. You've been smiling more lately, she said while driving her to school. Yeah, Amina replied, hugging her backpack, the latest notes tucked deep in a side pocket. I think I'm just adjusting. But it wasn't just adjustment. It was connection. During lunch that day, Amina dared to sit in the library again, not to hide but to write. She chose a table by the window, opened her notebook, and began crafting a new poem, one that started not in pain, but in gratitude. As she wrote, a girl walked past her table and paused. She had red hair freckles and a gentle smile. That poem you read in lit class. It was beautiful. Amina blinked. Thanks. I didn't think anyone really noticed. I did, the girl said before walking away. Amina stared after her, stunned. Maybe she wasn't as invisible as she'd thought. Friday arrived, and with it another note. This one wasn't folded. It was pressed neatly into her locker, written in slightly larger handwriting. You are not alone. You never were. That was the first time Amina cried again, but these were cleansing tears. Tears that fell not from being unseen, but from finally feeling understood. She went home that evening and wrote for hours. She didn't care if it rhymed. She didn't care if it sounded pretty. What mattered was that the words were flowing again, because sometimes all it took was one anonymous voice in the dark to remind you your light was never out, and it deserved to be seen. The following Monday felt different, like stepping into sunlight after days of storm. Amina walked through the front doors of Jefferson High with her head a little higher and her steps a bit steadier. The air still buzzed with the same morning chaos. Slamming lockers, hallway chatter, rushed footsteps, but something within her had shifted. She was still quiet, still kept to herself, but she no longer felt like a ghost drifting through the halls. Now she felt like a secret blooming. The notes had changed her, or perhaps they had simply reminded her of who she already was. That morning, tucked into the edge of her locker behind a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, she found another note. It was folded neatly as always, but this one was longer. Sometimes we don't need 1,000 people to see us. Sometimes we just need one. I've been where you are. I see you because I've felt what you feel. Keep writing. Keep rising. M. Amina clutched the paper tightly in her hand, letting her fingers absorb its quiet power. There was something about that line, I've been where you are, that made her heart ache. Whoever M was, they weren't doing this out of pity. They understood. They had walked through the same shadows. In literature class, Mr. Greaves returned their poetry assignments from the previous week. As he handed hers back, he paused for a moment. You have a voice, Amina. Use it. Her breath caught in her throat. Thank you. She turned the paper over. A minus. Her highest grade so far. That evening after dinner, Amina sat at her desk, her notebook open. She had written so much in the past week that the pages were beginning to curl at the corners. But tonight she didn't write a poem, she wrote a letter. Dear all, M, I don't know who you are, and maybe I'll never know, but your words have been the only light I've seen in weeks. I want you to know that I'm still here because you reminded me I'm worth seeing. Thank you. Amina. She folded it carefully and slid it into the front pocket of her backpack, unsure of what to do with it just yet. The next day she tucked the letter into a book and placed it on the windowsill of the girls' bathroom, the same stall where she had first found the note. It felt like a full circle, a quiet offering to the mystery that had changed her. 2 days passed. Then Thursday afternoon, just before the final bell, she returned to her locker and found something new. It wasn't a note this time. It was a bracelet woven thread in red and gold with a tiny charm shaped like a pen. Attached was a card. Writers wear their hearts on their sleeves. This is just a little something to remind you. M. Amina gasped, holding the bracelet in her hands. It was handmade, delicate, thoughtful. She slipped it onto her wrist, and for the first time in a long while she felt proud to take up space in the world. That afternoon she stayed after school for the creative writing club. It met every Thursday in room 214, and until now, Amina had always walked past the open door, too scared to go in. This time she paused. Inside, 4 students sat at a round table, notebooks open, soft laughter spilling into the hallway. A student looked up and noticed her. You here for writing club, come on in. Amina hesitated only a moment, then stepped inside. They introduced themselves, Harper, Tasha, Lewis, and a boy named Miles who wore a hoodie with paint splatters. The advisor was Mrs. Kinley, a young teacher with curly hair and kind eyes. Amina opened her notebook. She read a piece aloud for the first time that wasn't for a grade. Her voice shook at first, but she made it through. When she looked up, the room was quiet. Then Harper spoke. That was, stunning. Ms. Kinley nodded. You have something rare, Amina. On the walk home, Amina smiled so wide her cheeks ached. She glanced at the bracelet on her wrist. Whoever M was, they had led her here. And suddenly she began to wonder if maybe the world was full of people like M, quiet warriors who left traces of hope for others to find. Maybe she could be one of them, too. That night she wrote a new poem. Hope isn't loud. It doesn't scream in the halls or fill crowded rooms. It slips through cracks, slides under doors, hangs on locker notes, and wraps around wrists. Hope is a whisper, but when it finds you, you remember how to sing. She closed the notebook and turned off her lamp. Outside, the moon rose soft and silver, and Amina slept not with fear, but with wonder. By the time October arrived, Jefferson High was a canvas of shifting colors. Maple leaves curled into fiery reds and oranges, and the morning fog wrapped the school grounds like a woolen shawl. The days grew colder, but Amina Walker had never felt warmer. The bracelet remained on her wrist, never removed even when her mother raised an eyebrow and asked where did that come from. Just a gift, Amina had replied. It wasn't exactly a lie. Her days had taken on a rhythm now. Notes still appeared, although less frequently, and they had become more reflective. One had arrived on a Wednesday morning inside her literature book, written in the margin between lines of a sonnet. The world does not have to understand your beauty for it to exist. She traced the words with her fingertips, wondering how someone could make her feel so known without revealing their face. The Creative Writing Club had become her sanctuary. Each Thursday, Amina arrived 5 minutes early, settled in her favorite seat by the window, and lost herself in words. The others welcomed her gently, never asking too many questions, never pressuring her to perform. Louis shared his rap lyrics. Harper wrote stories about dragons and wheelchairs. Tasha liked short plays with absurd dialogue. Miles didn't share much at all, but he smiled at Amina every time she walked in. One Thursday, Ms. Kinley announced the club would host a student showcase in November. Open to anyone who wants to read their work aloud, she said. Poetry, short stories, and anything that speaks to who you are. Amina's stomach turned. She loved writing, but performing. After the meeting, Miles caught up to her in the hallway. "You should read something," he said. She hesitated. "I don't know." "You've got something worth sharing. That piece about the hallway whisper that hit me. Hard." She blinked. "You really think so?" "Yeah, I think a lot of us need to hear it." That night, she sat at her desk rereading everything she had written since the first note. It was a journey in ink, from pain to survival to quiet joy. And maybe someone else needed to hear it. She signed up for the showcase. The morning of the event, she wore her yellow hoodie. It was faded now, but still soft and still brave. As she passed her locker, she noticed something slipped into the vent. It was the first note in almost 2 weeks. "Tonight, speak. You've earned your voice. I'll be listening. M." Her fingers trembled. This wasn't just encouragement. It was confirmation. M was here. Close. Watching not from afar, but from within the same world she walked every day. That evening, the school auditorium was half full, but buzzing with energy. Parents, teachers, and students sat scattered across rows of blue plastic chairs. On stage, a microphone stood beneath soft yellow lights. Backstage, Amina's legs shook. Her name was 4th on the list. The girl ahead of her, Tasha, was reading a monologue from a surrealist comedy. The crowd laughed warmly. Amina clutched her notebook, pressing the bracelet to her lips like a prayer. Her name was called. She stepped onto the stage. The lights made it hard to see the crowd clearly, but somewhere out there, M was listening. She took a breath, opened her notebook. Her voice trembled at first. "I used to eat lunch in the library because no one ever sat next to me. I used to cry in the last stall of the bathroom because it was the only place I could exist without apology. And then someone saw me. Someone who slipped a note under the door and reminded me that silence is not the same as invisibility." She paused. The room was silent. This poem is for that someone, and for anyone else still waiting to be seen. She read, "She curled herself in tiled walls, and let the silence fill the cracks, where laughter never lingered long and mirrors failed to give her back. But paper found her trembling hands with words no hallway ever said, and in that quiet scribbled grace she found a way to lift her head. So if you ever find a note beneath a door or in your heart, know someone once believed in you enough to help you restart." When she finished, the audience clapped. Slowly at first, then louder. A few people stood. Mrs. Kinley had tears in her eyes. Luis was pumping his fist. Harper whooped. Miles gave a slow, proud nod. But Amina's eyes scanned the crowd for one person. In the second row, someone was standing. It was a girl. Tall, with brown skin box braids and a jean jacket with a button that read, "Poets are revolutionaries." Their eyes met. The girl smiled and tapped her wrist. Amina looked down. Her bracelet, a match. When the applause faded and the stage lights dimmed, Amina stepped down and found the girl waiting near the edge of the auditorium. She asked, breathless. The girl extended her hand. "Maya." Amina shook it, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she laughed. It was light. It was full. It was home. The next morning, Amina stood in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing her hair, her yellow hoodie slung over her shoulder, and her bracelet glinting under the overhead light. She had barely slept after the showcase, her heart still buzzing from the applause, from the words she'd spoken, and from that moment so small yet seismic when she looked into Maya's eyes and knew. They met again before school started just outside the cafeteria where early students lingered over vending machine snacks. Maya leaned against a column, her jean jacket as familiar now as the notes she once wrote. Amina approached slowly, cautiously, her hands tucked into her sleeves. "So, it was you," Amina said, her voice a mix of awe and disbelief. Maya smiled. "You figured it out." Why me?" Maya straightened her expression, turning sincere. "Because I was you. A year ago. I used to sit in that same bathroom stall every day. I couldn't breathe. I thought I'd never matter. Until someone left a note for me. Just one. I never found out who it was. But it changed everything. So when I saw you, I knew." Amina blinked, stunned into silence. "I made a promise to myself," Maya continued. "If I ever saw someone who looked like they were about to give up, I'd be the note under the door." Amina felt tears sting her eyes, but she didn't look away. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved me." Maya shook her head gently. "No, I reminded you. You saved yourself." From that day forward, they became inseparable. They met during a lunch sometimes in the library, sometimes under the old oak tree behind the science wing. Maya introduced her to other seniors who were quiet rebels in their own way, activists, artists, dreamers. And Amina, still soft-spoken, began to feel herself growing roots in a school where she once felt she couldn't even breathe. The notes didn't stop. But now they weren't anonymous. They became a tradition between them, little folded slips passed during class changes, tucked into bags and lockers. Some were quotes, some were affirmations, others were simple check-ins. Drink water. You forget when you're anxious. Your voice cracked and lit today. It was brave. Some people glow. You burn gently. One afternoon, Maya showed Amina a journal, an old weathered notebook filled with scraps of writing sketches and dozens of notes she had once written, but never delivered. "Some days I'd just write them even if I didn't know who they were for," Maya explained. Amina flipped through the pages, each one brimming you with tenderness and truth. She said, closing the book carefully, "shouldn't stay hidden." That weekend they met at a coffee shop downtown. Maya brought her journal. Amina brought hers. They compared notes, poems, dreams. By the end of the evening they had a plan. They would start a movement. Not an official club, not yet, but something simple, quiet, and wide-reaching. They called it the Door Project. It began with a shoebox outside the counselor's office labeled "Take One, Leave One." Inside were blank note cards, pens, and already written affirmations. No one monitored it. No one announced it. But by the end of the first week, it was empty. They refilled it. Twice. Then other boxes started appearing. One near the gym. Another outside the library, a third in the theater hallway. Notes began showing up on desks tucked in textbooks taped to lockers. Teachers asked questions. Students whispered about it in bathrooms and stairwells. But no one knew who started it. That was the point. Hope, Maya said, should feel like it belongs to everyone. Amina found herself watching the hallway differently, not for bullies, not for threats, but for moments, slumped shoulders, hurried footsteps, eyes that darted and avoided. She began leaving notes of her own. "You made it today. That's enough. You're not too sensitive. The world is just too loud. Someone notices, I promise." Some students cried when they found one. Others smiled and tucked them into their backpacks like treasures. Once Amina passed a girl in the stairwell holding a crumpled note to her chest. The girl didn't see her. She just stood there breathing deeply, like the note had kept her standing. The school felt different now. Not perfect, but softer. In November, Miss Kinley asked Amina and Maya if they would speak to the school board about the project. Not to explain it, she said, but to share what it's done. They agreed, nervously. On the night of the presentations, Amina wore her yellow hoodie under a navy peacoat. She stood at the front of the small auditorium with Maya beside her and spoke about what it meant to be seen and how a single sentence can shift a life. She told them about the bathroom stall, about the bracelet, about the showcase, about the day she didn't want to return to school but did because of a note. By the end, the superintendent had tears in her eyes. That night, as they walked out into the cold November air, Maya handed Amina a folded piece of paper. "For old time's sake." She grinned. Amina unfolded it slowly. It read, "You've become the door. People walk through you into themselves. Thank you for staying." They stood in the parking lot when tugging at their jackets 1,000 stars overhead, and Amina, once invisible, felt infinite. Winter arrived early that year. December swept across Jefferson High with a gray sky and a biting wind that stung the skin and made the hallways echo with the sound of wet boots and cold hands rubbing together for warmth. The trees outside had lost their leaves, and holiday decorations flickered in windows with a kind of tired cheer. But Amina Walker walked taller than ever. Her shoulders were no longer hunched, her voice no longer tucked behind her ribs. She was still quiet, still thoughtful, but there was light in her eyes now, a steadiness that hadn't existed before. It was the kind of strength that comes from having been broken and rebuilt. She and Maya had spent the last month expanding the door project. It had gone beyond their school. Maya's cousin started one at her college in New York. A teacher in another district emailed Ms. Kinley to ask how they could replicate it. There was even talk of creating a website, a digital library of anonymous notes so no one would ever feel unseen again. But as the last week before winter break arrived, something changed. Maya stopped coming to school. At first, Amina thought it might be the flu. Then 2 days passed, then 4. By the end of the week, her locker was still locked untouched. Amina's texts went unanswered. She checked social media, no updates, no posts, nothing. Then that Friday afternoon, Ms. Kinley pulled her aside after creative writing club. "I heard from Maya's mom," she said gently. "She's been admitted to a hospital downtown, mental health. Her anxiety got worse. She had a panic attack and collapsed. She's okay now, but they're keeping her for observation." Amina felt the floor shift under her. She nodded, but her throat closed. Maya, the brave one, the note writer. The fire in the dark had been struggling, and no one had seen it, especially not Amina. That night, Amina couldn't sleep. The bracelet on her wrist felt heavier than usual. She lay in bed replaying every conversation, every laugh every time she had leaned on Maya without ever asking if she needed support too. By morning, she made a decision. She opened her journal and wrote a letter, not to Maya, to everyone. It began, "Sometimes the people who hold us up are the ones hanging by threads." She poured her heart out, not just about Maya, but about herself, about how easy it is to overlook the ones who smile the brightest, about how kindness is often quiet, and so is pain. On Monday, she asked Ms. Kinley if she could read it over the morning announcements. The principal hesitated and then nodded. We could all use more honesty right now. That morning, her voice filled the school. We walk through halls full of people and assume the strongest ones are okay. But sometimes the strongest ones are just the best at hiding it. I want to say this. If you're hurting, you don't have to do it in silence. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to be held up, too. This school's full of hearts that need each other. Don't wait to be asked. Leave a note. Reach out. We rise together. The halls were quiet that day. Not because of sadness, because of awareness. The boxes for the door project were overflowing by lunch. Teachers added new supplies. Students created new boxes. One freshman boy started writing thank you notes to people who inspired him that week. A group of juniors taped up a hallway filled with printed out quotes, affirmations, and confessions. And Amina, she started leaving a different kind of note, one addressed to Maya. Every day she left a folded letter at the windowsill of the art room, Maya's favorite spot, just in case someone passed it along. Each note ended with the same line, "You gave me the courage to speak. Now let me hold the silence for you." 2 days before break, Amina was called to the front office. There was a package waiting, small, wrapped in brown paper, no name. She opened it slowly. Inside was a new bracelet matching red and gold, but with 2 charms this time. 1 pen, 1 door, and a card. "Still here, healing, watching. Thank you for seeing me. Amina sat in the office lobby, eyes burning, heart wide open. She slid the bracelet onto her wrist and walked back into the hallway. Students brushed past her. Some smiled. One girl paused and handed her a note. "You helped me find my way back to myself." Amina tucked it into her coat. When she reached the library, she stepped aside, found a stack of blank paper, and began folding. Because sometimes healing is circular. The person who is saved becomes the one who saves. The girl in the stall becomes the voice over the intercom. The note under the door becomes a movement. And sometimes the most powerful stories aren't told loudly, they're whispered one paper slip at a time until a whole school learns to listen. Amina didn't need to know every name. She didn't need credit. She didn't need applause. She had a bracelet. She had a friend. She had a purpose. And that was more than enough.